West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
So Glenn, we've got some quick movement here by the Supreme Court. Yesterday, Trump requested a stay from the Supreme Court on sending the immunity issue back to the trial court, and already today, SCOTUS is taking action. So what happened here?
Yeah, Brian, the Supreme Court just lit a very short fuse, and I think it's ultimately a good sign. So here's what happened. Yesterday, Donald Trump, at the last minute, filed a request to stay or stop his trial from moving forward in the trial court. This, of course, is the federal prosecution in Washington, D.C., being presided over by Judge Chutkan for Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The lower court panel, unanimously, 3 judges said, yeah, Donald Trump doesn't have absolute immunity against prosecution. No president does. And they gave Donald Trump just 1 week to go to the Supreme Court and ask the Supreme Court to put a pause or a hold on his trial. And if he didn't do it within a week, then his case was going to begin moving toward trial again. So at the last minute, he filed the request for the stay or the pause. And then immediately, within 12 hours or so, the Supreme Court said, okay, prosecutor, special counsel Jack Smith, we want your reply to Donald Trump's request for a stay within 1 week. So we're going to see something in the coming days where Jack Smith inevitably files a reply saying, no need for a stay, let's get this case back on the trial track.
Now, is it unusual from your vantage that the Supreme Court is moving so quickly? And as a follow-up to that, does it portend a quick resolution on their part on this issue of immunity?
Yeah, it is unusual. Generally, it's a pretty staid affair when things are filed in the Supreme Court. There are normal deadlines for replies to be filed. I think the Supreme Court appreciates the urgency of the moment. I would go so far as to say the Supreme Court is stepping up the pace a bit by asking Jack Smith for a reply within a week. I do think the fact that they want this answer from Jack Smith so quickly is an indication that they're going to move quickly toward a decision. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that decision is likely that this case does not need to be paused or stayed or stopped while there is further litigation, if any, on this presidential immunity issue. So keep our fingers crossed because, our ultimate goal is accountability and justice. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the Supreme Court pretty promptly denies the stay, puts it back in Judge Chutkan's hands, and the first thing Judge Chutkan will do, I predict, is call the parties in and say, okay, we need to pick a new trial date, and that one is going to be set in stone.
Now, you'd mentioned that this was moving quickly as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, and they gave Jack Smith just a week. Can Jack Smith respond even quicker than the deadline of next week to get this thing going even faster? Why not respond today so that we can move on to the next step?
Yeah, he can and he might. I even suspect he will. But here's the thing. So Donald Trump and his lawyers filed a 110-page brief. Now, mind you, they are just retreading the same failed arguments. When I say failed, they have failed repeatedly. They failed in the trial court to convince Judge Chutkan. They failed in the appellate court to even get one of the three judges to buy into their nonsense about absolute presidential immunity. So they really padded this Supreme Court request for a stay. They probably could have done it in a half a dozen pages. They put 110 pages before the court, probably hoping that it might bog things down and maybe slow Jack Smith down a little bit in his reply. But as you say, Brian, the Supreme Court gave Jack Smith a week. But, I am not so sure Jack Smith is going to take a week. He will need to go through it. He will need to have the attorneys who are the appeals expert on his prosecution team look at it, draft a reply, make sure, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, all the footnotes and citations are accurate. But we could see a reply within 2, 3, 4 days.
Okay. Well, to that point, what are next steps here? Like, how many more procedural motions do we have to contend with before we actually get a decision on the meat of this issue?
Yeah, the next step might be the whole ball game. Here's why I say that. Once Jack Smith files his reply, which will undoubtedly be, we don't think you need to stay this case. We don't think you need to take review of the case at all. But that's not what is at issue right now. The only thing at issue in this new motion and reply is whether the Supreme Court should stop the case dead in its tracks or put it back on the trial track. Jack Smith undoubtedly will say, put it back on the trial track. If the Supreme Court agrees to put it back on the trial track, that is almost the whole ball game. Why do I say that? Because the law as it applies to immunity says nobody should have to do anything to defend themselves at trial or even prepare to defend themselves at trial if they in fact have immunity. Because if they have immunity, they shouldn't be prosecuted in the first place. So reading between the lines, if the Supreme Court says we are not issuing a stay, we're going to let this thing get back in Judge Chutkan's hands, she can set a trial date, and the case can move in the direction of trial, that will be some really important foreshadowing that the Supreme Court has all but decided, no, we are not going to entertain this absolute immunity nonsense. And if we do entertain it, we're only going to entertain it so we can write an authoritative legal opinion shooting it down precisely the way Judge Chutkan did and the way the three-judge panel did unanimously. Sometimes the Supreme Court likes to feel like, the big dogs on the legal block. So they may say, you know what, we agree with all of those other judges who have already rejected Trump's claim of absolute immunity. But, for posterity and history, we want to be the ones who author the authoritative Supreme Court opinion saying so.
Glenn, just for posterity here, can you walk us through what we can expect in terms of the timeline? I know the main question that everyone's wondering right now is, could this thing still happen? Assuming that the Supreme Court rules correctly and says that Donald Trump doesn't have full immunity to do whatever he wants as president, assuming they rule that way, if we would still be on track, based on where we are right now, for a trial before the election?
We would be. And here's why I say that. Assuming the Supreme Court gets this right, and I think they will get it right, for goodness sakes. The Constitution says, inferentially, a president can be prosecuted. Not only that, a president can be prosecuted even if he's impeached for the same conduct and the same crime. There is no open question of law or of constitutional interpretation. So I am fairly confident the Supreme Court will get it right. And assuming the Supreme Court is prepared to say a president does not have immunity, he can be prosecuted for crimes committed while in office, I think they're going to say that much sooner rather than later. Because if that is their legal conclusion, I think they understand the urgency of the moment, the need to get this back on Judge Chutkan's calendar so she can set a trial date. If that happens in the coming weeks or even in the next month or two, I think we're going to see potentially a summer trial, and that will resolve the case well in advance of the November election.
Do you think it's possible that based on where we are right now, that this could take the trial date of May 20th, which was supposed to be, or it's still pending to be the classified documents case, but I think there is an expectation that that case would be pushed back?
I think there is an outside possibility that they could substitute the D.C. prosecution for the Florida documents prosecution. As you say, Judge Cannon down in Florida set a May 20 trial date, and she has not yet canceled or postponed, or what we call vacated, that trial date. So I think that's a possibility, and it really boils down to how quickly can the Supreme Court put this back in Judge Chutkan's hands? Because Judge Chutkan had said, listen, when and if I get this case back, I will still give you some lead time, probably a couple of months, before we begin jury selection and we go to trial. So I think right now there's a possibility that May 20 could end up being the new D.C. trial date, or it could be, perhaps in June or maybe even July.
When this trial had initially fallen off, the D.C. prosecution, when this had initially fallen off trial track, we had about 90 days between that day and when the trial was supposed to take place. So if we had the same amount of days, that would put us roughly at around February 20th, February, March, April, May. So do you anticipate that will need to be almost exactly the same, or is there a little bit of shortening that could happen if we're to see that May 20th trial date happen?
I would say a little bit of shortening could happen, but it's not likely to happen. Once a judge goes on record as saying, listen, whenever I get jurisdiction back, whenever they hand the case back to me, I'm going to give you about the same amount of lead time as you had before this delay, this pause, this hold was put in place. I think the judge will be loath to kind of back off that position and say, well, you know what? I'm going to cut it down to 60 days, because I think the attorneys could rightfully complain that, look, Judge, all along, we had this 90 days in the back of our minds because of what you told us. So I don't see Judge Chutkan really truncating or cutting down the time that she said she was prepared to give them.
All right. Well, to that point, hopefully Jack Smith and his team move quickly, at least in responding to this this request by the Supreme Court. So takeaway here, Glenn, good news that the Supreme Court is already moving on this?
I'm going to say it's not bad news. I know that sounds like a cop-out. I would put it in the good news category, but probably only by about 51%. It's an indication that, one, the Supreme Court appreciates the urgency of the moment, and two, it could have been worse news because they want to reply quickly. That, to me, suggests that they're thinking more about a trial track than they're thinking about just getting rid of this case entirely, because they are going to create out of whole cloth absolute presidential immunity from prosecution. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they know they're not going to do that. That's why I'm going to put this in the good news category.
It is Wednesday, the 14th of February of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests with their meddlesome saints? Oh, Claudius, we got another one. Yes, it is St. Valentine's Day. And some of us say St. Valentine's Day because it's also Ash Wednesday. So, a little smudge and a love letter to the jailer's daughter who's gonna, execute you for not forsaking your belief. Okay. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad. Depends on what your belief is. Oh, well. St. Valentine's, I don't know why I keep saying saint. When we talk about indoctrination, brain control, mind control, and its effects on the long-term memory and its decline, I was well attuned to it. I mean, I studied very briefly for the priesthood, and, when you have a young, active mind and you're, there was all sorts of political reasons, too. I think the church sort of looked down upon us when my mom divorced our dad. yet, in spite of the beatings. Numerous, to the point of being in the hospital for a long time. Damn the world. Well, long story short, at some point you realize that maybe I should triangulate and come up with something that I can divine as the truth with a capital T. And I did. And it didn't necessarily include every little aspect of what it meant to be a Catholic and nothing else. So I was well aware of what it was like to be in a cult. I had belonged to one of the oldest cults in the world, and so I was well primed not to be impressed by any new ones. And the reason they were new is that they were adopting all the ones that came before, mixing them up and thinking they had something new going on there. Yeah, right. All the same old tropes, all the same old lingo to get you to, in some ways, just part with your money. In other ways, mold impressionable minds for our own devices. So that's where we are right now. Somehow it has it been turned? I mean, is our attempt to have a more equitable society, one with due process and equal protection for all, meaning, the infirm, racial issues are not an issue. Women, no more chattel. We're not leading these ladies around by wringing their nose anymore, guys. Okay? All of that's social engineering is what I've been told. Just recently, in fact, yesterday. Right here in Sundown Town, Oregon. And that's a region. It's not just necessarily Rogue River, our little village, though that's where we are. Anyway, all that social engineering is why MAGA is right now. They just couldn't take it anymore. And I really didn't want to get... I know I'm jumping ahead here in this little story because of this story about social engineering, but let me just give a little bit of background. It's not jumping ahead. I'm giving background. That's the reason the people decided to dump the Democratic Party. I was a Democrat until I realized there was all this social engineering in the 80s. And I was thinking, what happened in the 80s besides Reagan? And then, of course, Reagan, when he opened up his presidential campaign, where did he start off? Yeah, Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the Freedom Riders were abducted and murdered. Nice joke, huh? So that's when they realized there was all this social engineering, like they had to mix with the races. No, I have to drink from the same ladle of water. No, put that down. Put it down. You get a new ladle, little girl. Yeah. So, in spite of the fact, what I remember from the 80s, is Ronald Reagan, a little bit of Oliver North. Yeah. Racism, rank racism, welfare queen. Yeah. They are taking your rights by getting equal rights. That was what the great lesson was. And government is the worst thing that could ever happen to the world. And when did we start really hearing that in great force? Is, by, I don't know, people who didn't like what Roosevelt was doing. We say Roosevelt. Some people say Roosevelt. Roosevelt. I know it looks like Roosevelt, but it's, it's Roosevelt. They didn't like what old FDR was doing. Nope. Regulators coming down to break up our steel. We'll show them. And they did, too. So it's a little disheartening when you realize that there was a reason why civics was purposely, they stopped teaching it purposely. Right after Watergate. Why was that? Well, apparently people knew too much about how government worked and what impeachment was. Now I guess it's like coloring your hair. And the guys do that too. I made a great vow never to color my hair or put plugs on the top of my pate. No plugs on my pate. I get what I get. Yeah. Of course, new knees and shoulders, those are always nice. Well, let's admit it, but, if I have wrinkles of wisdom, I'm not going to flatten them out. I earned these. I don't know how many I have, but I'm not young looking anymore, that's for sure. And that's okay. So, on this fabulous St. Valentine's Day, we see St. Valentine's. Because it's Ash Wednesday, too. Man. And Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, where we smother, priests. Shut them up. That's not to say that old Claudius, or whoever, was God on earth. They sure thought they were. Isn't that familiar? All right. Which comes to what we have in store for you here in this fabulous Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Yes, we have a curated show, and we're going to tell you what it is, and we better quick. Well, at the top, yeah, that was Cohen and Kirshner. Yeah, I'll get it out. Greg Kirshner, giving a rundown on the Supreme Court's quick response to Trump's last-minute motion on his immunity deal. Could spell disaster for the crick. Yeah, it might just mean that his immunity isn't so immune. We're a nerd to it. Yes, we are. On the rest of the menu, the federal government has finalized almost 200,000 acres for floating offshore wind farms along the Oregon coast. And it's rough out there. Windy, too. A Republican Michigan lawmaker loses his staff and committee assignment after an online racist post. And Alabama lawmakers advanced absentee ballot restrictions. They hate America. And Americans most of all. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Albanian authorities accused Iranian-backed hackers of a cyber attack on the Institute of Statistics. And Jared Kushner defended his business dealings with Saudi Arabia. Bonza Arabia. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, who does so much more than just monitor the chat room. So thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really helps us pay our bills. Puts a big dent in that sum, and your generosity has helped us over these years to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance. Resisting as the founders originally intended. And what did they intend? For us to resist the forces of evil. Unfortunately, it takes a little bit of money to do that. And that's to pay the bills and just, so like I said, your generosity puts a big dent in that. And how could your generosity be affected? Well, I'll tell you how you can get there. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, we are able to pool those resources with other like-minded individuals and put a big dent in these ever-increasing bills. I guess it's inflation or price gouging. Nah. Regardless, it's the magic and mystery of the market, and we just decided we'll just pay it. We won't, argue and not pay it and all that stuff. No. Pay your bills, and for the most part, you can fly under the radar. So far. Anyway, thank you for your generosity, and we really couldn't do it without you, so thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on all the social media platforms that you can think of, I'm only kidding. But you can find us on the Twitter and Mastodon and Blue Sky and Spoutable. I don't know about Threads. I guess I got to look into Threads again. I started to do one for myself and gave up. But nonetheless, you can find us most everywhere at Netroots Radio, even on Facebook, and which we all take care of. So there. But Tom takes care of those and so much more as well. So thank you, Tom, for everything that you do. Follow me on social media platforms as well at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diaries. Not stories, diaries. On Daily Codes, 10 minutes before showtime. And you can find those show notes and links, diaries, very quickly by linking to my social media feed, in which you'll find the links to the links. It's not as convoluted as it sounds, but regardless, you can read the actual reportage by the actual reporters. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and most importantly, do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, really wherever podcasts can be found. And we are now on Audible too, Amazon and Audible. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Claire Rush out of the Associated Press. The federal government has finalized 2 areas for floating offshore wind farms along the Oregon coast. Authorities announced yesterday, Tuesday, bringing the state closer to commercially developing and producing a renewable energy source that's part of the fight against climate change. The 2 zones cover roughly 195,000 acres and are both located in southern Oregon. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management said one area is 32 miles off the coast of Coos Bay, and the other is 18 miles from the shore of the small city of Brookings, located near the California state line. They have a capacity for producing 2.4 gigawatts of energy, enough to power roughly 800,000 homes. Following the announcement, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek said she was committed to developing a transparent roadmap for exploring offshore wind opportunities with the input of coastal and tribal communities. Offshore wind is likely to play an important role in meeting our state's growing energy demand and goal of 100% renewable energy by 2040, Kotek said in a statement. It also represents a significant economic development opportunity for the Oregon coast. Ed White of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this Smothered Benedict St. Valentine's Day Wednesdays. A Republican lawmaker in Michigan lost his committee assignment and staff days after posting an image of a racist ideology on social media. House Speaker Joe Tate, a Democrat who is black, said he will not allow the House to be a forum for racist, hateful, and bigoted speech. Now they're going to say that he's the real racist. Just you wait. State Representative Josh Scriver, who is white, I guess they have to, both sides, I guess, shared a post on, they say, X, formerly known as Twitter. No, it's still known as Twitter. Come on. That showed a map of the world with black figures greatly outnumbering white figures with the phrase, the Great Replacement. Oh, my God. They want to have the Great Replacement replace the Great Experiment. The conspiracy theory says there's a plot to diminish the influence of white people. Well, yeah, come on. And why is that a bad thing? Especially those white people. Shriver, who represents portions of Oakland and Macomb counties, can vote on the House floor, but Tate removed him from a committee and told the House Business Office to oversee his staff members who still can assist constituents. Representative Shriver has a history of promoting debunked theories and dangerous rhetoric that jeopardizes the safety of Michigan residents and contributes to a hostile and uncomfortable environment for others. Boy, isn't that the truth. Brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Alabama lawmakers advanced legislation to restrict assistance with absentee ballot applications, a measure Republicans said is needed to combat voter fraud. Black people voting and their friends. But the opponents argued that would discourage voting. Of course it would. The Alabama Senate approved the bill on a 27-8 vote that broke down along party lines. Jeez. The bill now moves to the Alabama House of Reps. Senate Republicans, who called the bill a priority for the session, said it is aimed at stopping ballot harvesting, a pejorative term for dropping off completed ballots for other people. Republicans said they want to get the legislation in place before the November election. The legislation would make it a misdemeanor to return someone else's absentee ballot application or to distribute applications pre-filled with a voter's name or other information. We get that in the mail here, right in Oregon, right in the mail. 20-some-odd years, 30 years. It would become a felony to pay a person or receive payment to distribute, order, request, collect, pre-fill, complete, obtain, or deliver a voter's absentee ballot application. I guess if you get a tax write-off for taking care of an elderly parent and you drop off their ballot to the slammer with you with a parking ticket. Senate Minority Leader Bob Singleton said the bill invokes the state's history of restricting voting. People in my community died for the right to vote. My great-grandmother used to have to tell how many jelly beans were in the jar just to be able to register to vote. All right, let us get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, the big deal. Okay, so Matthew Vaughn is the person who's directed all of the Kingsman movies. His latest light throwback spy romp is Argylle. Ellie Conway, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, is a spy novelist whose series protagonist is Agent Argylle, played in dramatizations of what Ellie is writing by Henry Cavill. Ellie is struggling to finish Book 5, where Argylle and his sidekick, John Cena, go against an antagonist played by British pop star, maybe of the moment, Dua Lipa. When Ellie encounters actual spy Aiden, played by Sam Rockwell, who informs Ellie that real spies are dedicatedly following her books because the books are scarily accurate, so much so that an honest-to-goodness evil secret organization, similar to the one she writes about, is very interested in the not-yet-finished ending of Book 5. So, Ellie's in danger. And action, espionage, romantic, no, you don't understand, I'm just a novelist, I'm not a spy, comedy ensues. So there's a lot of ways this movie does or maybe doesn't work that I can't talk about without spoilers. I can, however, talk a little about this. There's an interesting thing going on in this film with bodies. I mean, you've probably already heard, Time Magazine did a culture piece on it. Unlike Lipa, Howard ain't Hollywood thin anymore. She is, in fact, quite Zoftic. But it's not just about Howard versus Lipa undulating in her very tight, we have to work to keep our PG-13 dress. Cavill and Cena, playing fantasy agents, both literally have superhero bodies in comparison with Rockwell, who's a little paunchy, which is the least of what you get in your 50s, which Rockwell is. And when you see the movie, it's clear that we're meant to compare these two camps. But to what end? Do these body battles help the story? Do they happen in spite of it? I still don't know what I think about it all, but it's really thrown me a lot in what was supposed to be just a light throwback spy romp. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Gaines. Even if you are a safe, experienced driver, accidents can happen at any time. Young children are especially at risk for injury and death in a motor vehicle crash. Dr. Erin Sauber-Schatz is a researcher with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss the importance of keeping children properly restrained in motor vehicles. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you.
Erin, how many children are killed or injured each year in a motor vehicle crash in the U.S.?
In 2013, 638 children aged 12 and under died in a crash, and over 127,000 were injured.
How effective have child safety seats and other safety devices been in preventing injuries and death among children?
Car seats and booster seats are very effective at preventing injury and death in a crash, but the most effective seat is the one that parents use to buckle their kids on every drive.
Where's the safest place for children to ride in a car?
The back seat is the safest place for children to ride in a car, buckled in an age and size-appropriate car seat, booster seat, or seatbelt.
How long should a child ride in a safety seat?
Children should use a car seat until they're at least 5 years old, and a booster seat until the adult seatbelt fits properly. The adult seatbelt fits properly when the lap belt lays across the upper thighs, not the stomach, and the shoulder belt lays across the shoulder, not the neck.
Erin, where should parents go in their community to get help installing and using car seats?
Parents can get one-on-one help free of charge from a certified child passenger safety technician. You can find a tech near you at cert.safekids.org and click on Find a Tech. Another option is to check with your local police or fire department.
Erin, where can listeners get more information about restraining children properly in motor vehicles?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov and type in the search box, Child Passenger Safety.
Thanks, Erin. I've been talking today with CDC's Dr. Erin Sauber-Schatz about the importance of keeping kids safe in a motor vehicle. Remember, for children under the age of 13, properly restrain them in the back seat. If you're unsure about how to install or use car seats, check with your local police or fire department. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Robert Gaines for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO. This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to this edition of PCD Soundbites. I'm Karen Ngowe, filling in for your host, Latoya Simmons. Current guidelines recommend adults get at least 2.5 hours of moderate-intensity aerobic activity a week, like brisk walking. But many Americans don't get enough physical activity to meet this guideline, which can lead to chronic disease and premature death. Joining me today is Dr. Susan Carlson, a lead epidemiologist in CDC's Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity. We'll be discussing her research, which aims to estimate the percentage of U.S. deaths attributed to inadequate levels of physical activity. Thank you for being here, Susan.
Thank you for inviting me, Karen.
Susan, give us a brief overview of your study.
As Karen stated, the current aerobic physical activity guideline recommends that adults participate weekly in at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, or its equivalent for substantial health benefits. The health benefits include such things as lowering the risk of premature death, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancers, and depression. In our study, we first examined what influence physical activity levels below the current guideline have on premature mortality, and we wanted to look at whether this association differed by age. The second purpose was really to estimate the percentage of deaths that are attributable to levels of physical activity that are inadequate to meet the current guideline.
What did your research reveal about the association between inadequate physical activity and premature death among American adults?
So in a nationally representative sample of U.S. adults, we found that adults with levels of physical activity inadequate to meet current guidelines had an increased risk of premature death. Overall, we found that 8.3% of deaths were attributed to inadequate levels of physical activity. Our findings suggest that if you increase adults' physical activity levels to meet the current guidelines, this is likely one way to reduce the risk of premature death in the United States.
What did you find when you looked at this association in different age groups?
We did not find a significant association between physical activity level and mortality in adults aged 25 to 39. However, for those aged 40 to 69 and 70 or older, we found that not meeting the guideline was associated with an increased risk of premature mortality.
How do these findings compare to previous similar studies?
We found that our estimates were similar or slightly lower when comparing to similar studies that have examined this association. In general, our estimates of the percent of deaths attributable to inadequate levels of physical activity is not practically different from other studies.
Do you think researchers have become better at estimating the percentage of deaths attributed to inadequate physical activity?
Estimating the percentage can be challenging. Many of the previous studies that have provided these estimates have done so by combining estimates across different sources. This can really bias results, especially if there are differences in the populations or if the physical activity measure differs. When you use a survival analysis conducted in a single population, which is what we did in this study, you can overcome a lot of these biases and improve your estimates. Facilitating the linking of CDC survey data from systems like the National Health Interview Survey to mortality data can really help researchers explore these issues.
How do you think this research can be used to help get adults moving and reduce the risk of premature death associated with inadequate physical activity?
So we found in this study that a significant portion of deaths were attributed to lower levels of physical activity. By estimating the public health burden of low levels of physical activity, this can be important for setting research and program priorities and for public health planning at the national, state, and local level. Ultimately, individuals make the decision to be active. However, this decision can be made easier by programs and policies that provide opportunities for physical activity and by making communities more activity-friendly. By working collaboratively across different sectors, communities across the nation can help to increase physical activity levels and potentially reduce the risk of premature death.
Thank you, Susan. You can read her study, Percentage of Deaths Associated with Inadequate Physical Activity in the United States, online at cdc.gov/PCD. The findings and conclusions in this report are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the official position of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
We're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by-in for the people. After oral arguments were heard February 8th in Donald Trump's 14th Amendment eligibility case, some legal scholars voiced concerns that the pending decision could have dangerous consequences. Justices Kagan and Coney Barrett expressed skepticism that the framers would intentionally grant a power to the states that could change the outcome of a national election. But Edward Foley of Ohio State University wrote in The Atlantic that the 14th Amendment intentionally gave states this power to prevent a rekindling of Confederates in power, however messy it might be. When asked what precedence there was for the Colorado decision, the plaintiff's attorney cited one 1868 case where the governor of Georgia disqualified a candidate for the U.S. House. But Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington cites 7 other cases, only 2 with convictions, where the 14th Amendment Section 3 was used by states to disqualify federal, state, or local candidates. In the federal cases, Congress refused to seat those candidates after an election. Election law scholar Richard Hassan of UCLA Law's Safeguarding Democracy Project suggests in Slate that if Trump should be convicted in federal court in one of his other cases, a SCOTUS decision ducking the 14th Amendment sets up a dangerous scenario where Trump wins the election, but a Democrat-controlled Congress disqualifies him and keeps him from office after the election. We have links to these articles at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. James Riddle Hoffa was born to a coal miner in Brazil, Indiana. Tragedy struck the Hoffa home in 1920 when at age 7, young Jimmy lost his father. In 1924, like many families in Brazil, the Hoffa family moved to Detroit, Michigan in search of work. At the age of 14, Hoffa left school to help support his family, where he found work in a Kroger grocery store warehouse. At the young age of 19, he led the warehouse workers in a successful strike. A year later, he joined the Teamsters Union. He rose quickly through the ranks, becoming vice president in 1952 and then president in 1957. Under Hoffa's leadership, the Teamsters Union grew to represent more than 2 million workers. Hoffa took a strong stance against racial discrimination, both within the Teamsters Union and in American society. In 1958, he wrote a letter to Teamster Union locals asserting his stance. He wrote, "As Americans, we should be opposed to bigotry and racial discrimination at every turn, and do everything possible to make the Bill of Rights a reality for every citizen. In 1964, Hoffa was able to bring nearly all of the nation's truck drivers under the National Master Freight Agreement, one of the very first industry-wide, nationwide multi-employer agreements, a powerful bargaining strategy for these workers. That same year, Hoffa was convicted for bribery. Rumors swirled about his alleged connections to organized crime. After his prison sentence was commuted by President Richard Nixon, Hoffa mysteriously disappeared in 1975. There are many conspiracy theories about the disappearance, fueling many television specials, films, and books. But these allegations and mysteries cannot diminish the lasting legacy of Hoffa's unwavering commitment to working people. Today, his son serves as president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, carrying on his father's legacy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 41 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs only in the upper 40s, maybe low 50s. Winds out of the south at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Raining at the moment, which it will be for the rest of the week. And we should be getting over 1/4 inch of rain today, with showers this evening becoming a steady light rain overnight, bringing with it also another 1/4 inch of rain. Lows in the upper 40s. Lows in the lower 40s. Winds light and variable, and rain likely tomorrow with highs near 50. Once again, winds light and variable. And it looks like we should get rainfall around 1/2 inch at some point during the day into the night. So, hey, looks like pollen is still rated as none here in our hamlet of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 36 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady. Oh, it just switched on me. It is now falling at 29.88 inches. Visibility is at 5 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 55 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 60 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 61 and sunny. Bagram is 38 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 38 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 66 and fair. Tokyo is 51 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 56 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and mostly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 40 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 32 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict, Valentine's Day, Wednesdays. Albania's cybersecurity authorities have accused a hacker group sponsored by the Iranian government of attacking the country's Institute of Statistics earlier this month. On February 1st, the institute reported becoming a target of a sophisticated cyber attack and that some systems were affected. The National Authority for Electronic Certification and Cybersecurity said yesterday that the Homeland Justice, an attacking group sponsored by the Iranian government, of the attack affecting 40 computers. Iran's mission to the United Nations did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Albania has accused Iran of the past. After a cyber attack in July of 2022, the government blamed the Iranian Foreign Ministry. The attack was thought to be in retaliation for Albania sheltering members of an Iranian opposition group. It led the government to cut diplomatic relations with Iran. The United States Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency identified Homeland Justice as Iranian state cyber actors. The Iranian Foreign Ministry denied it was behind that attack. The U.S., NATO, and EU supported NATO member Albania in the dispute.
Je te donne seulement l'amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Michelle L. Price of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's former White House advisor and his son-in-law, defended his business dealings after leaving government with the Saudi crown prince who was implicated in the killing in 2018 of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Kushner worked on a wide range of issues and policies in the Trump administration, including Middle East peace efforts, and developed a relationship with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has overseen social and economic reforms and a far-reaching crackdown on dissent in the kingdom. That's putting it mildly. After Kushner left the White House, he started a private equity firm that received a $2 billion investment from the Sovereign Wealth Fund controlled by Prince Mohammed, drawing scrutiny from Democrats. Kushner, speaking at a summit in Miami yesterday, Tuesday, sponsored by media company Axios, said he followed every law and ethics rule. He dismissed the idea of there being any concerns about the appearance of a conflict of interest in his business deal, because even if there were, he doesn't care, and there are. He said the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which has significant stakes in companies such as Uber, Nintendo, and Microsoft, is one of the most prestigious investors in the world, and when you turn your head to crimes against humanity, you might get some too, in this reporter's opinion. He also defended Prince Mohammed when asked if he believed U.S. intelligence reports that the prince approved the 2018 killing of Khashoggi, a Saudi dissident and Washington Post columnist. The prince has denied any involvement. Are we really still doing this? Kushner at first said when he was asked if he believed the conclusions from U.S. intelligence agency. I'm sure he sniffed in his haughty little elitist way, too, I'm sure. Kushner said he had not seen the intelligence report released in 2021 that concluded the Crown Prince likely approved Khashoggi's killing inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, and then they cut off his head and other parts of his body, bone sawed. I know the person who I dealt with. I think he's a visionary leader. I think what he's done in that region is transformational. Well, you know, killing women, stabbing them, cutting off their heads, stoning them. That's advancement now, isn't it? Oh, my God. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.